Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound, but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. I'm your host, Bubba Wheat, and each episode my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the fourth stop at 2019's Season 1, Episode 3, Replay, starting at 10 minutes and 8 seconds with a montage and Nina and her son eating at the diner, and ending at 14 minutes and 21 seconds with Nina recording the reading of lottery numbers. Joining me today is Mark from French Toast Sunday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Bubba, and yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm ready to get into this episode. I've taken a little bit of break and, even a little bit of behind the scenes info. These are actually the first episodes that I'm recording for this episode. So hopefully I'm not going to repeat too much for the episodes that have already aired that have yet to be recorded. So, before we get into today's loop, had you seen any of these Jordan Peele seasons?
Right. Unfortunately, I haven't. I heard all about the buzz, and I've seen the commercials like everyone else, and it had some really big names, had some A-listers in these episodes. But I literally got Paramount Plus this morning, specifically for this podcast. So I have not gotten into Peele's Twilight Zone too much. There's 2 seasons of it I've learned thus far, and unfortunately we're not getting a season 3.
Yeah,
So
but I think it's okay just because from what I read, it sounds like they just they felt like they didn't really have any more stories that they felt strongly enough in order to make a season 3. So it's not like it was canceled because of low viewership numbers. They just
okay,
made the decision to stop.
so that's actually pretty. That makes me feel a little bit better about it. I wish more. I miss TV that told its story and then left. It's done now. And I think we're kind of getting back to that in general. I don't want to name drop any shows that I feel don't do this, but it's it's really unfortunate when a really good premise gets ruined because it was drawn out way past its natural ending point.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of the American way
It
and
is.
the syndication way. The goal was to get to like 100 episodes because that was like the magic number for syndication.
Right, right. But just tell your story and get out. I think of uh, Watchmen on HBO. I would love another season of Watchmen, but honestly, they told their full, complete story. It wrapped it up pretty nicely, and it would be kind of bad to have a second season of a show like that. And as I mentioned, shows are already starting to get back to that. Kind of ignoring the whole syndication thing, but putting out a really good product and then moving on. Uh,
Yeah, that's one benefit of the streaming age, as it were, because they get to tell, the amount of episodes and they're not constrained by episode lengths. I think most series still stick to a generally half hour or generally hour long episodes, but it doesn't have to be like exactly 42 minutes in order to get the time for the commercials to fit into a time slot. They can have one episode that's 40 minutes, they can have an episode that's 55 minutes.
right.
So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of leeway there with these streaming services now, and a lot of the seasons are like 6 to 10 episodes rather than 22 or 24.
Right. And I definitely chalk that up to the whole to streaming, really. Streaming, like you still get your 22 episodes if you're watching uh like a not a syndicated, but a network television show. You know, they're
Hmm.
still aiming for that magic 22 number for a season. But you're also seeing a lot more people take these mid-season breaks, so they're not doing as many episodes, but they're still trying to take up that much, that amount of time. That kind of magic September through May, sometimes June, season arc for a show. So yeah, it's definitely changing. The way we watch things, the way we digest content. So, and there's some down parts, but I think it's getting better. I think there's some great ups to it.
Yeah. And so, since this was your first experience with this Twilight Zone, what did you think about this episode? It's season 1, episode 3 replay. What did you think about the episode as a whole?
Oh wow. Uh, I think watching this episode as a whole, I had to use, I think, 2021's, if not 2020's buzzword, and that's triggered. Yeah, it's an episode that pretty much, is pulled straight from the headlines of late. And for me, it was a tough watch. I mean, there are definitely points where I heavily considered, like, yeah, I may not be able to get through this. This is a little bit more than what I was expecting. I think Twilight Zone as a franchise has always taken, sort of the mundane and put a more surreal spin on it.
Hmm.
Uh, and unfortunately, given our current social climate, the surreal in this episode isn't that surreal. I don't want to ruin spoil anything for future podcasters that talk at the beginning of the episode, but what it deals with is something that happens very often, and it's just
Yeah.
it was a pretty tough watch at the beginning. It got a little better, but we'll talk more about that later. But overall, it was an experience.
Yeah,
There
and
were a
I
lot
and I did make a pointed effort in choosing the guests for this season
mhm.
because, I'm a suburban middle-aged white guy, and this episode deals heavily with the Black American experience.
Very.
And so this is something that is very important to discuss, and it's something that the only experience that I have personally is stuff that I see in the news and shared through social media, which, like you mentioned, happens lately. It seems more often than it should, because
Right.
this is, the what ACAB, um, in terms of the feeling towards police and the inherent racism that shows up in a lot of the systematic police forces across the country.
hmm
And this really does take that social um, that social concept and put this sci-fi horror spin on it.
Right. Absolutely. Definitely. Yes. It was just really. Whew, it was just a tough watch. Because if your listeners don't know, I am quite the opposite of Bubba. I'm not that much younger than Bubba, but I am a slightly less middle-aged black man in America that grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. But yeah, it's something that there's a feeling that you get being a person of color in America, and you see police lights in your rearview mirror while you're driving. There is a particular feeling in the pit of your stomach because you really don't know what may happen. So you actually have to. You're actually trained on this as a child. In most situations, I can think to me being a child of 7 and 8 years old, and my parents talking to me about how to behave and how to act if you're ever stopped by police officers. It's actual training that you receive from your parents. And it's kind of funny because you look at the social commentary around cops being not properly trained or being afraid and not knowing how to act under pressure in these certain situations. And here you have, children of color being trained this at the age of 8 and be able to hold their composure during these instances, and the trained official that represents the law can't. So it's a very, it's a very big dichotomy there. But yeah, I had that similar feeling while watching, this episode, and to add to that, feeling was the fact that it was a time loop. So it was something that was happening over and over and over again. It's like, wow. I think it's important television to watch for people. Just not everyone. So
yeah, and I feel like in terms of the critical success and the audience reaction to this episode, this feels like this was considered one of the lesser episodes of the Jordan Peele series. And I think I think a lot of viewers kind of felt, I think maybe a lot of black viewers did feel like they might have felt a little triggered, and I think a lot of white viewers maybe thought that the social commentary was a little too heavy-handed in this episode. So I can understand why people don't like this episode as much, but I do think that it is an important episode to discuss, and I think that there's a lot of good stuff within this episode.
Right, I definitely agree. Definitely wholeheartedly agree with that. It's great. It should be required for some who don't understand that experience or have direct access to it. So I think that should be the major demographic for this episode. For others, maybe not so much, but definitely for those who don't have that life experience, this is a great episode that I think more people should watch.
Yeah. And so let's go ahead and get into the specific loop for this episode, which this is the fourth iteration of their loop, and it starts off with the son. I forgot his name already. You just told it to me. Dorian. Yeah, I keep trying to think because it's like Dorian Gray, which I don't think that name that actually has any sort of connection to the episode whatsoever. But that's about the only other place that I've heard the name Dorian before.
Yes, I let you go with a few Dorians. I know a few Dorians, but yes, it is not a name that you hear every day.
And so it starts with Dorian repeating the name Trinity, and this is a reference to an earlier loop where Nina has already picked out the name of Dorian's daughter. So, do you know anybody outside of the character in The Matrix named Trinity?
I'm trying to think. I have a goddaughter named Charity, but I don't know too many Trinities. I can't say that. I can't think of anyone outside of Carrie Ann Moss, honestly. Yeah, that's the only Trinity I'm aware of.
Yeah, and I'm curious if that name specifically is supposed to be some sort of biblical reference, like the Trinity in the Christian faith is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and I think that actually does fit into the overall concept of this episode, because we'll get into it just a little bit later, but I feel like this episode paints the police officer Lasky as the devil, and so I do think that referencing Dorian's future daughter as Trinity, that's like the savior, that is like them saying that the future is what's going to save them in the present.
That I was thinking that as well, especially when you take a look at, the relationship between, well, it's not the Father, the Son, and the Holy, it's more the Mother, the Son, and, the soon-to-be daughter. Not even soon-to-be daughter. This child is not, I think it's important to note that this is wishful thinking on
Hmm.
Nina's part. Uh, Dorian does not have a girlfriend that's pregnant. This is just something she's wishing for the future. She pre-named her granddaughter Trinity. But when you look at that relationship, and the episode does deal quite heavily with the relationship between Nina and her father, and just connections that way from parent to child. So it definitely ties in with the Judeo-Christian sense of the Trinity. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, and then I think the next kind of background detail that I noticed, like, they have this conversation, and Nina is freaked out because this is, she's had two run-ins with the police officer already, and so she is trying to escape him.
Hmm.
And so they leave immediately while he's still in the middle of his dinner, or his breakfast, I guess. Whatever. I'm not actually sure what time of day this is supposed to be, because he's eating the chicken fried steak. Um, and so she thinks, maybe she can outrun him if they leave earlier.
Right.
And I am curious, and I'm not sure if if there's any connection, because there's a close up of a mile marker that's the 8 mile.
I noticed that too. And all I could think of was Eminem's movie. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't think that necessarily ties into this.
Yeah,
Or
I was curious too, because I've never seen 8 Mile, and I looked, like, I didn't do like a deep dive into it, but I just kind of did a cursory glance to see if there was any connection between like the director or the producer or any of the cast, and I couldn't find any of those types of connections.
right. And I didn't do much research, but I just search my memory banks. Like, I don't think, because it was intentionally shown. The director definitely wanted you to notice this sign.
Hmm.
But that much is clear. But exactly how it ties into the greater story and what it was alluding to, that escaped me. So that's something I'll definitely look into a little bit later. But I did not readily catch the reason why we should have paid attention to that. But it
Uh,
was very clear that we should pay attention to
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was something about her mom's spaghetti.
that. Yeah.
That's about the extent that I know about 8 Mile, or I don't know, maybe that just the fact that that's the story of Eminem becoming a great rapper, and that's the potential future of Dorian with him going to college in order to better himself. I think that's really stretching it.
Yeah.
But then the next little background detail I think is important, because it's she does a U-turn and goes off to the back roads, and there's a close up of a sign that says the old Cadwallader Inn,
Mhm.
and that name is actually a reference to a Twilight Zone episode that I'm actually going to discuss here at the end of this episode, just briefly. It's from the season 1, episode 6, called Escape Clause. And in that episode, Mr. Cadwallader is the name that the devil uses for himself.
Interesting.
And then also, not in either the loops that we're discussing here in these episodes, but in the previous loop, in an earlier loop during the little montage during the rewind, you do see a quick shot of a devil bobblehead, and that's another reference to a classic Twilight Zone episode that I discussed earlier within the Try episodes, called Nick of Time, which is one of the William Shatner episodes. So I think that's interesting that they do have this extra level of references to the devil, and that's especially why I think that this episode is painting this Officer Lasky as the devil in a certain way.
Yeah. And definitely along with that, the fact that he seems to be so omnipresent. He's just everywhere, just at the most inopportune time. He's there, with the devil being essentially God's opposite. If you are a believer, of good and evil in that sense, if God is everywhere, so is the devil. So I definitely think the fact that he just seems to always appear, definitely ties into the fact that he that alluded to him being Satan. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and he always seems to pay extra attention to the two of them.
Right.
Like anytime whenever they're in the diner, like even in this loop during the diner, whenever she's like having her mild freak out, we get the shot of Officer Lasky just looking over at them with a very interested look.
Yes. Yes. Like, what's going on? Why are they here? Yes, absolutely.
And then, we get a little bit with them playing around with the radio, and we get a little bit of this song, which is a song that I was not familiar with. I had to look it up by the lyrics, but it's called "Great Man" by Kevin Gates, and the lyrics that we hear are part of the chorus, and it's a repetition of look in the mirror, I see a great man. And I think that's a very clear choice because that's in reference. I think that's really painting a picture of Dorian as this kid that's going into college. Nina is a woman that she talks about breaking free of her old life and her old family to make something of herself. And then she's also sending her son to college in order to better himself. And I think that's really really something that this episode pushes, that they're trying to make themselves better people.
Right, right. And I agree with that. I keep on saying I agree, but but I think that's further noticed during that conversation between the two of them after Nina veers off to take a different way to get to the college, one that avoids Sheriff Officer Lasky. Spoiler, they don't. They're having a conversation where she says, you must think your mom is crazy. And he says, yeah, well, he says something to the extent that, I'm crazy too. And they go into this conversation about how he wants to go to college, so he can help change other people the way that she changed him. And that's when we hear that song. So it's definitely, just driving home that point of, the younger generation trying to be the change, and make things better. So yeah, I think that music. I know Kevin Gates. I'm aware of him as an artist. I didn't know that particular song, but it was a great choice with that scene, just to drive home that subtle point of, there's greatness inside of Dorian, and his mom is trying to preserve that greatness, by breaking this time loop that she appears to be in.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I know that this is a time loop podcast, and I'm discussing this episode because it is a time loop in a way, but I do think that it's a slightly different type of time loop because she is fully in control, because she makes the decision that she's, especially once she learns the trigger, that I'm going to turn this camcorder on to give me a potential out in this moment.
Right, right. Yeah, typically a time loop, if you think of Groundhog's Day or Happy Death Day, it's a set time, it's 24 hours. So the sun rises, sun sets, 12 p.m., 12 a.m. hits, it resets. But here, I agree. This is a slightly different time loop because she does have the camcorder that allows her to fast forward. I want to rewind whenever she wishes to. I wonder if she could have fast forwarded. I wonder if, that necessarily wouldn't be a time loop anymore. But I wonder if she had the ability to fast forward, to the future.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, and I think we won't get to talk about it specifically in our two episodes, but in the episode after it, we do get a little glimpse of the future. So I'll definitely bring up that fast forward button as you know as a potential tie-in to that, where she has the future vision
Right.
right there in the middle of the episode. But back to today's loop, we they stop at the motel just because she says she's not feeling good. Hopefully that hopefully that stopping will help her escape. Maybe kind of like I get the feeling that it's like if we stop at the motel, then this Officer Lasky storm will just pass us by.
Right. She's thinking of this is the at this point the fourth loop. So uh she I think she is now she's now rationalized. She's thought like, okay, this is an issue. This road is an issue. This cop is an issue. How do we take him off the board?
Yeah,
And
it's the fourth loop, and she was stopped by Officer Lasky twice in a row. Because the
right.
first one was just showing the camera or showing her how the camera works.
hmm Right. So I think she's now rationalized it. She's like, okay, let's take him off the board by let's just completely changing, our gonna just ditching our original plan, and to see where that gets us. So yeah.
And I think that she does kind of fall into a false sense of complacency because they're in this motel. She turns on the TV. They're doing the lottery drawing. It's the Dogwood State Lottery, and I don't believe that's a real one as far as I could tell, at least not connected to the state of Virginia. Even though that Dogwood is the state tree of Virginia, that's the little tidbits that I was able to pull from that. And then we have this little conversation with Dorian where he goes into his his teenagers know everything speech where he's like, numbers aren't random. Everything that in the universe happens the way it is ever since the Big Bang. It's all destiny. So let me ask you, why do you think she made the decision to start recording at that moment? Because at this point, she feels very complacent. She feels like she's escaped the cop at this point. But she starts recording with these lottery numbers, and it's something that, she's very derisive of the lottery in general. She calls it the idiot tax. And
Right.
I'm somebody else that I completely agree with her concept of the lottery. It's one of my favorite comedians. I forget who it is off the top of my head, but they said that lottery is a tax for people who are bad at math.
You know what? I can say that I by nature, I'm not much of a gambler. Personally, the money guaranteed in my pocket means more to me than the possibility of maybe getting more money. Like I know I have $20 in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
If I gamble, I may get some money, but I may lose the $20 I definitely have in my pocket. So that's not a bet that I'm willing to take. So I'm very leery of gambling myself. I say all that to say this one time when I was about 18, 19 years old, I was driving down the street and numbers came to me. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, I should play these. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm not a lottery person, so no, I'm going to ignore it. This might have been around, it wasn't like a Powerball or a Mega Millions type of situation. It's just like the local Maryland State Lottery. And they usually air it around 8 p.m. is when they show the lottery numbers on TV. And these numbers came to me around 5. I'm like, well, I have to find a gas station and play. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't play the numbers. And they actually came out that night. And I yelled, my, oh my God, the one time numbers came to me, I did not play them. And I've never had it happen since. It's been another almost 18 years since then. And yeah, it just has never happened. So I'm like, you know what, the universe aligns, to give me some money. And I, like a dumbass, said no. So I'm now fully in the idiot tax category now. But to answer your question, I am not quite sure why she chose to turn the camera on at that point. What I I'm sorry, when viewing this scene, it was definitely, I think it was a nice tension break from the situation as it was. She's seen something happen to her son at this point twice. To her baby boy. So this scene was a really nice kind of break. I don't want to say it added levity, but it did lighten the mood. It wasn't comic relief, but it was just like a tender conversation between mother and son. And just over the course of the whole episode, I really did enjoy those moments when they were just talking with each other. Those are some of the best scenes, in my opinion, if looking at the whole episode. But
Yeah, like the character building scenes.
yes, absolutely. So, but to answer the question, I'm not quite sure why. I guess maybe thinking back on it, she's trying to, show her smart aleck, college, age son. It's, if I can guess this, you have to come visit me more often. So she now knowing, how the camera.
Although we don't get that line in this loop, that
Oh
doesn't
no.
come until the next one.
Ah. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize. That's the second episode.
Yeah.
But it was just a nice scene, in my opinion, to kind of lighten the mood some and just dive deeper into their relationship.
Yeah,
But
I think it can be read like potentially one of two different ways. I almost think that with him talking about destiny, I almost think there's a little bit of, well, he's talking about destiny. I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to blow his mind
mhm,
just for a second to to throw something in his face, and it's like, see, your mom knows something that you don't know.
right.
And but at the same time, it's almost like what she's doing is actually proving him right in a way, because everything that happens still happens. She makes slight changes, but everything that happens to them still happens to them.
Hmm.
Like this ever present force of Officer Lasky, even though we don't really see him come in today's loop, but that just, he keeps coming no matter what they do. Everything they do, he still happens. So it's almost like it was destined to happen, and whatever she's doing to try and change it doesn't actually change it. It's something that has always happened and will always happen.
Right, right. I agree. Yeah, that is. I see uh, how you arrived at that point. So definitely, that is very true. I think that has a definite ring of truth to it.
Yeah, and then she presses the rewind button, and that's where this loop ends. And that is all the notes that I have for this loop. Was there anything else that you noticed during this that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think we've covered everything that I recall about the loop. Uh, so yeah, so I think that I think we did a good job covering all of it.
And so I did want to talk about a classic Twilight Zone episode, which, I apologize. I did forget to um, tell you about this ahead of time. Each one of these episodes I'm doing on the Jordan Peele series, I'm also having just a brief discussion on a classic Twilight Zone episode in order to give me the excuse to watch more of the classic episodes other than the three that specifically involve time loops. And the
Mhm.
one that I'm discussing today is Escape Clause, because of that Mr. Cadwallader Cadwallader. I kept trying to repeat that in my head in order to, it's like, this is how you pronounce it. And still, every time I go for it, I don't get it right the first time. But, did you watch much, like any of the classic Twilight Zone?
I I am not super well versed in the classic Twilight Zone. I definitely remember catching an episode or two when they used to show the older guys in the earlier days of the Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's when I watched this. That's when I watched Twilight Zone the most. The episodes that kind of jump out at me in my memory. One, the episode where like New York is going through a heat wave. Uh, it's essentially it predicts global warming to a certain extent. I remember that episode. And the other episode that sticks out in my memory is the episode where the astronauts crash on what they think is a brand new planet, and they're just in the desert, a couple miles outside of the launch site. But those are two Twilight Zone episodes that I remember. So I'm not quite. I don't know this particular episode that you're about to discuss.
Yeah, so this one is one that I watched earlier today. It's from, like I said, season 1, episode 6. It's Escape Clause, and it's about this hypochondriac, and he thinks that he's sick. A doctor comes and sees him, and he's like, "This is the healthiest person I've ever seen." And his wife comes in and talks to him, and it's like, I'm at death's door, and then you and the doctor are in the other room talking about how close to death I am, and then you come in here and you're trying to tell me I'm healthy. It's all a trick. It's all a lie. And then she walks away, and then a man, and then the devil appears in his room and offers him a deal with the devil. He offers him immortality in exchange for his soul. And then he does have this escape clause. So if at any point during his immortality, if he gets tired of life, all he has to do is call on the devil and say, I'm ready to end my life, and then the devil will end it right away. And he's like, all right, well, what about aging? And he's like, you will only just barely age. It will mostly be imperceptible. And he's like, okay, that sounds like a great deal. And he signs his soul away, and he starts living life. But then the next scene is him getting hit by a train, and then he's like completely unharmed, and like he's visited by insurance adjusters that are giving him this accident, this like settlement money of like $1,000 and $1,500, and he's like, I've been in 14 accidents, and it feels like it's only been a week, and he's already bored with his immortality, or it's more like he's bored with his invincibility, because this gift of immortality and invincibility has turned him into a thrill seeker, but he doesn't get any thrill because there's no risk in anything that he's doing. So he doesn't get hurt, and he's like, well, I'm going to go jump off the roof. Maybe that'll give me some sort of rush. It's almost like he's a drug addict that's already developed a resistance to his drug of choice. So it's like he keeps trying to get this bigger and bigger hit, even though he hasn't even experienced the joy of getting high.
Oh wow.
It is kind of ridiculous, and it gets even more ridiculous because he goes up on the roof and his wife's trying to stop him, and then she accidentally falls over, and then he's like, I wonder if she felt that rush of excitement. It's like, I wonder what she felt. And he has like zero emotion for the death of his wife. He goes back down and calmly calls the police and tells them, I just killed my wife.
Oh, wow.
And with the hope that he's going to get the electric chair. And it's like, well, maybe they'll give me the electric chair, and maybe that will give me some sort of thrill. But instead he gets life in prison. And then he's like, oh crap, I didn't think about that.
Oh.
And the guard's like, "Oh, don't worry, people only live like 40 years. That's no big deal whatsoever." And then here he's thinking, I'm immortal now, so I'm going to spend the rest of eternity in jail. And then the devil comes back and is like, "Eh? Eh?" Basically, and gives him a heart attack, and he dies right there. And in general, it wasn't one of the best episodes. I did love the character of Mr. Cadwalder. He is like just his voice. He has one of those great like 50s voices. And like the fast speaking but still very deep, very eloquent voices. I loved everything coming out of his mouth. He sounded kind of um like a carnival ringmaster.
Ooh, okay.
Just
I totally get what you're saying. Okay.
yeah, like the smoothest snake oil salesman. I just love listening to his voice. But the actual plot of the episode was just silly, and I didn't think it really hit the sort of social commentary that it was trying to tell. Like it didn't really hit the twist ending that it was going for. So I can see why this isn't necessarily one that people were talking about, but I did want to watch it because it did have that connection to this episode, and I thought that was fun to see that this other instance of the devil and how it compares. And he was like a more overweight man, and the officer Lasky is also a more overweight guy.
Right.
So there is that extra connection, but I definitely would consider this like mid to lower tier Twilight Zone or classic Twilight Zone. But
Oh,
it was still interesting watching it.
now that I have I have Paramount Plus now, I may have to watch that episode. I just looked it up actually. So I may be watching that later tonight.
Yeah, there's I've let's see, I've watched about a dozen episodes so far, and I think I've hit the majority of the top 10 episodes, and most of them are really great. And then I've hit a few of the like middling episodes, and those have been hit and miss.
Mhm.
But I've still enjoyed everyone that I've watched so far. But that I think that does it for this episode. Um, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you online?
Okay, hey everybody. So I I'm a member of a podcast called French Toast Sunday. Uh I say was a member because we still are a group of people that talk about movies. We just haven't done it in a very long time. And I don't know exactly when we'll be all back together. But we have a top five list every week about movies, and we kind of shoot the shit about. Oh, can I cuss on your podcast? I'm sorry. I should have asked that before.
Yeah, I generally avoid it, but it's okay. I'll just I mute it out.
I do apologize. But we discuss, topics about regarding to movies and just really talk about our lives mostly. One of the big advantages of our podcast is that we're all in the same room while we're doing it. And as the pandemic has taken that ability away from us for the most part, hopefully it'll be back soon, and we'll be back soon. But we still post reviews to our website. So you can find us at French Toast Sunday, spelled normally, all one word, .com. That's
And
French
it's
Sunday.com.
and it's Sunday like the day, not like the ice cream.
Yes, thank you for making that point. Yes, Sunday like the day and not the ice cream.
And there is well over 100 episodes in the backlog to listen to. It's a fun podcast. I did listen to it whenever it was going on a regular basis, and I enjoyed listening to you guys talk about movies and other random stuff.
Oh, thank you. It's actually more random stuff than movies on most occasions, but we eventually get around to movies. But it's a long and winding road. it's if you want to be friends with people like and not really know them, listen to our podcast because it's there are very few holds barred during
Yeah,
our
if you've seen that meme of what it's like listening to podcast, and it's like a guy sitting in front of an advertisement or sitting in front of a poster of like two women laughing and talking to each other, and then he's sitting there and laughing by himself, and it's like this is what it's like listening to podcasts.
yes, yes, that is definitely us. But we actually have like 300 episodes. I
Oh
think
yeah.
we just did our 300th episode right before we took our sabbatical, and we've been doing it for 10 years. So it's it's a fun time. Definitely check it out. Check out the website. Listen to our podcast. They're everywhere that you find normal podcasts. So I know we're on Spotify, we're on iTunes, Podomatic. So we're pretty easy to get a hold of.
And as always, I am Bubba Wheat, and you can find me at flightstights@movienights.com. You can find this podcast, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group where you can join and discuss episodes as they come out, as well as have any sort of discussions about time loop movies and TV shows, past, present, or future. It's a lot of fun. You should join. And if you happen to be if you happen to be an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you go on to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and a review. It would help us continue to grow. So until next time, I will still be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
You used to call the lottery the idiot tax. Guessing at numbers is some foolishness. Could be anything.
It's not all random, though.
How's that?
Well, since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is.